Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is titled, Is this a me thing or a we thing? We're distinguishing today about personal growth from relationship growth.
I have a funny confession to make to all of you. I enjoy the kind of silly, lighthearted dating relationship shows on TV, in particular Netflix. I like to watch them in a sense to kind of just tune out, right? Not have to read the academic things and just some of the more like research and personal development books and all those things. I love that part of my brain, but I also like just relaxing, right? And watching these things. But I can't help but watch these shows and see where each participant has the things to work on individually, which we're going to describe some very specifics, and as a couple where they have not learned how to create a secure and solid partnership. And sometimes I wish like being able to go on the show and say, hey guys, here's what I know, like pop out of nowhere, right? And be like, hey, let me just share with you an observation of what I see that you each can work on as individuals that might be coming from your past, for example. And here's something you may not understand about creating a secure and solid partnership together through skills and tools. Mm-hmm. All that to lead up to some of the observations in today's episode.
I don't like to watch them as much. There was a time where I thought I could watch Love is Blind for research purposes, but I don't like to anymore.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, so that's where we differ on our downtime movie TV watching. But to get to the point here, it seems obvious, but you have to come to the realization that some of the issues and the challenges that you come across, not the ones that are strictly external, but actually external circumstances could come up from you yourself being the source. But either way, challenges in your marriage are going to be sometimes because of your own individual things, and we're going to go more into what these things are, but they're going to be in the variety of your shadows, your inner child wounds, trait limitations, places that you could say we're meant to grow through as individuals, and us having not grown through those, that's where we need to do the personal work. Yeah. So things in our relationship part of are going to be caused by I have not done that work yet. There are going to be things that are caused by Jocelyn not having done her work on some of these sources, if you will, of internal development. And then some of them are caused by the dynamic that is created between the two of us.
Yes.
So that's where we want to talk about. There's the personal growth and development needed for the individual. Then there is the work that the couple, all of us, have to do on the relationship growth side. And some of those, as we move past this opening point, would be, I might not be someone that gets quickly defensive with friends and family, but there could be a dynamic in our relationship that we haven't worked through yet that causes me to be quickly defensive. Could also be things about how I have more of a filter of a negative perception that has been created of my partner, a lack of security or trust that comes from things from the past. So that dynamic is created between the two of us.
Yes.
So again, issues are going to be caused sometimes strictly from external, sometimes from my internal work that hasn't been done yet, sometimes Jocelyn's work, and then sometimes the dynamic that we create together. And sometimes that dynamic even creates external problems that may not have existed by themselves either.
And the funny thing about a romantic partnership, and especially the stakes are highest in a marriage because you truly are merging lives and really relying on each other, right? Like there's a lot of faith to have in another person if I'm going to build a life with you. Like I'm putting my life satisfaction on the line. I've never said it that way, but think about that. Like I am putting my life satisfaction and how my life goes on the table as if I was like gambling in a sense. And I'm hoping you step up to the plate and build this life with me.
Hopefully you've done a little bit more on your marriage than just a
Gamble.
gamble.
Yeah, exactly. That's where skills and tools and working on things, so it's not that risky. But think about that. Like, that's why we need to have this team mindset, and we're going to really outline this. But I want to, if you've been a longtime listener, you may have heard us refer to this framework. It's a social psychology framework that's really helpful. And I'm going to try to depict it because it's best when you see the image. But it's called the VSA model, and there's an adapted version of the VSA model for marriage. Now, I want you to imagine visually, on the very left side of this model at the top is what each person brings to the table. They call that enduring vulnerabilities and strengths. So again, this is what I bring to the table. This is my past. This is my attachment styles. These are my fears, my insecurities, how I was raised, my personality, my values.
My shadows, my inner child wounds, my trait limitations.
Yes. So that's what we each bring to the table. That's where there's some individual work. Then still on the left side of this model, but now down below it, are the stressful events that we're going to encounter if we're going to build a life together, right? Our 9-year wedding anniversary is coming up next week, by the way. 10-year is next year. We've got a fun big trip that we're planning for that 10-year celebration. We've been together over a decade, and in that decade, we have experienced many different stressful events. Some good stress, right? Not all stress is bad. Some good stress because it's just a part of changing and adapting. For example, starting a family and really adapting our life to take care of a child.
I hope you're giving away the A.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't want to give it away. But so anyway, we have those stressors that we're going to encounter. You're going to experience financial stress. You're going to have family members get unwell or get sick. You are going to sometimes go through maybe mental health challenges, right? So we're going to encounter those stressful events. I'm sorry, but you can't live in a bubble and escape that. That's a part of life. Now, those two things, right? You move to the middle. And there's this box that they have really focusing on how you adapt. And this is so much of where we need to focus, because even if you found someone, and in these dating shows, right, they're often like, I think I found the one, which, by the way, we don't think that there's this perfect person for you. We just think there's this person that you choose, and you choose to keep loving them and build a life with them. And sorry, you're not going to be perfect either. And so we need to know how to adapt. How are we going to handle seasons where we don't have that much alone time together, where we maybe feel pulled in all these different directions, trying to work and make money and take care of our young family. And, oh, by the way, we have family members we have to be showing up for. And so we can have these seasons that feel harder to give each other time, attention, and love. So how are we going to adapt so that we aren't growing apart?
And to finish the model out, even though we had an episode on this, your ability to adapt is really the key for your marriage satisfaction. And I mean, ideally, having a high level of satisfaction for years to come. So then you would call that duration. So the success of your marriage is not by duration only. You want to be together a long time, but with high satisfaction. So if we track that back, it means you have to. There's no other thing. Like, this is it. Now, you can break this down into the skills and tools, and that's why we love coaching. That's why we do what we do. But unless you're able to adapt, then you got no shot.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing else to do. And if you bring that further back, then it's like, okay, well, what we break this into is the whole title of this episode. Our ability to adapt comes down to the individual work that we each have to still do, and then there's the dynamics that we have to address in the relationship growth and development that we do as a couple. Now, this isn't about the model specifically, but the more work you do on yourself has a positive feedback loop to how you will interpret and face external challenges. So those two play into it.
Yeah.
And then the individual work you do and the vulnerabilities also is a positive feedback loop on your own part of adapting as a couple.
Yeah. And
so, like you said, it's best if you could see it. But hopefully that describes there is effect that happens on the individual work for the level of challenges that you can face. If you don't do the individual work, then what feels like a level 3 challenge to someone else can feel like a level 9 challenge to you.
Yeah.
So it's not even specifically about the life event that you face. It's about the level of individual work you've done. That's what is relative to how challenging an external event's going to be.
It's so true. And some common ways that either adapting positively or negatively show up, right, are conflict, right? Once you reach these points, you're going to argue, you're going to disagree with each other. And you've probably seen our posts where we talk about how you have to know how to disagree without fighting. So how are you going to handle situations? I mean, every day we meet with couples and they're facing high stakes decisions, right? Especially if they have kiddos. It's like, hey, are we going to choose this medical option for them, or are we going to do this? Are we going to move over here or over here? And so there are these decision points that you're going to make, and you have to be able to adapt and handle those moments where you may see it differently. Or again, if you are feeling busy and stressed, I mean, think about how many people don't know how to adapt and cope with stress. We talked about that even in the last couple of episodes of what women and men are really dealing with internally. And if you don't know how to adapt and handle those stressors, that's going to manifest in your relationship. So we want to move to the next point. And I promise as we go through the episode, we're going to give you some specific examples to really contemplate. But the main points are what we want you to just think about within your relationship, where you each need to grow individually and together. Here's the thing to get. People underestimate the amount of personal growth that is required to go the long haul. Like truly people...
In a marriage, you mean?
A long haul. In a marriage. No.
Just be clear. I mean, I think everyone knew what you're talking about. Yes. The long haul. Didn't really paint that in the best light. To have the long duration with high satisfaction... success in marriage
right
I agree with you on this too. You really do underestimate the amount of personal individual growth we all have to do. I am just compelled to mention right off the gate, I've been noticing for myself, one of my big personal trait limitations is my expectancy that things are supposed to go the way I plan them to go. I'm very much a planner, but I'm also very much this person that I often think about what could go wrong, and I try to put things in place to offset or mitigate the probability that could happen. One of my limitations I do see is, well, I guess there's two in that. One, I don't think I've really come to the acceptance of how challenges are supposed to be integrated into my life. I still say I see challenges as something to avoid.
Yeah.
Or to not happen, or to plan for, or to prepare against.
Yeah.
So when that does happen, and I feel like maybe I do a pretty good job of not having things go wrong, and they I think typically go the way I plan. But when they don't, I do get very frustrated. I also get very frustrated that I now have to do more work. So there's something I still haven't really discovered in my, beyond a trait limitation, there's a shadow there for me that I also believe that I should only have to do something once. And when I have to do something more, I get really frustrated.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something I see for myself. And as you can imagine, that definitely also plays into the relationship dynamic between the two of us. So if I'm having to do something again, and then I perceive it because you didn't do something a certain way, I'm going to be more frustrated. And so that's a place I'm really wanting to work, is being more relaxed and at ease and accepting of how things are going to go, even outside of how I plan, and more accepting that you also do things differently. And if I have to do something again, that I'm going to really work on, I don't know what the term is. I mean, I could say grace easily, but just being more loving and kind in those moments where I feel, oh, if I would have done this, it would have worked out, or I can't believe I have to do this a second time.
It's really great that you share that, and I'll even share my part in that and creating this dynamic. One of the things I've had to work on ongoingly, and much less presently because I did a lot of the front-loaded work on this, but I used to very much so take my partner's feelings and mood personally, right? So let's say you would get upset or disappointed by something being out of order, or like, oh, this was not in my plan for the week and this came up. Like there's just these slight plot twists that can happen. And I would see that in your body language, in your facial expression, in your tone of voice. And of course you are
probably to the things I just said.
Yes.
I was having to do something again.
Exactly.
It didn't go the way I thought.
And then my, I guess, strategy before that didn't work was I would then go to my partner. And this was definitely most prevalent in my past relationships before you. And then I had to work on this a lot early on in our relationship, is I would then just have to go to work at like making you feel better. And in particular, because I was uncomfortable with what you were feeling because of how it was making me feel. And then I would internalize your feelings, and then again, like I have to fix it so that I feel better. So let me fix how you
them,
feel.
But not for very long. Internalize quickly and then verbalize.
Right. And then verbalize. And so in a sense, I would like start an issue, not necessarily a full-blown fight, but I would take it personally, have to talk about it, have to make you feel better, rather than now what I work on is observing you, I'll check in, hey, anything on your mind? How you doing? Do you want to talk about it? But I now can let you be in your process.
I was going to say, it's probably even the most upgrade, just recognizing, and obviously it comes through our communication in part, but also maybe adaptive learning as well. What works, what doesn't, and then your own individual adaptation to, hey, if I messed up, it's not going to, like, let me be in it. I don't need a conversation. I don't need any particular advice, and not all the time, but I think, you really have let me be in my own frustration and upset, which has let me work on that more myself too. It's like, I recognize I didn't do that the best. And I also recognize how my individual pattern of frustration from this idea of time and only doing this one time, like, you let me work on it even more, I think, from the past couple of years. So I do acknowledge you for that.
Thank you. And think about the story we've all been sold in movies that we've watched throughout childhood, and even like adult romantic comedies. There's still this like thread of how they end of happily ever after. And really, it isn't all happily ever after. Of course, we want the main experience that you have to be fulfillment and happiness together, but we're going to disappoint each other. We're going to get frustrated in life. And so that's where adapting comes in. How are we going to handle these moments where we're on different wavelengths? We are in different moods. We disagree on something. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but you did not marry a perfect person. There is no perfect person for you. Now, if you envision yourselves being puzzle pieces, are there puzzle pieces that fit well together where you can reinforce, positive traits in each other? Yes, but it really comes down to, again, how you choose to adapt. And this will lead us really to the next thing, is that you both engage in your marriage and in your life as if it is both a me thing and an us thing. It isn't one or the other. You realize that you two are influencing each other at all times. So you walk into the house and you just came from something, work or being with kids, whatever you were doing, and you bring an energy to the space. You bring an attitude, and you are giving your partner both verbal and nonverbal cues. That's going to influence them, how they feel in the environment, and then how they respond and act. And so if you really start to think of it being both of you and think about how you're influencing each other, and now we need to outline, then what's the goal? What's the goal of all of this? If I'm going to do this personal growth and I'm going to work on our relationship because, okay, Freemans, you're telling me that growth is inevitable, that this is a part of it. It's that you two intentionally work towards satisfaction and security. Notice again, those are different than let me try to make my partner happy all the time and let me make sure that we always feel blissful and perfect, because we are going to face those stressors we talked about. Our flaws are going to come out. And so if we focus instead on satisfaction, that means we're going to communicate. We're going to check in on each other. We're going to do the family meetings that the Freemans talk about, which, by the way, we'll link that in the show notes if you're new here and don't know about that. But we're going to communicate. We're going to check in on each other. We're going to course correct and acknowledge our part in maybe going through a harder season or being less connected or less satisfied. And then security. Security is one of the most important things to be working towards in a relationship. And what does that mean? What does it mean to feel secure? It means that I feel even if we have conflict, I know we'll work it out. Even if we disagree and had an argument, I'm not going to have love withheld from me. We're not going to be distant from each other for days.
You're not going to withhold love.
Yeah, we're not. And same thing. Yeah, I'm not going to withhold love. I know that even if we go through a harder month or months, because again, whatever we're facing in life might be taking our energy and our time, that we're still going to find ways to show each other that we still love each other, that we still value each other. So security, creating that in your partnership is extremely important. And that's where we see so many people falter, is they don't catch themselves and see where they're playing a part and creating a lack of security and satisfaction in the relationship. And it's so easy to point the finger at the other person. But what if instead of pointing the finger at them, you said, how am I influencing their actions? Not causing, right? Because we all have individual responsibility for our actions. That's a major tenet to have in your marriage. But how am I influencing their behavior? How am I influencing their perception of me and the relationship, and therefore they're responding accordingly? And then here's the key, and this is what really, really changed for me as I gained more wisdom and I worked on myself, was to look at everything within the relationship as a mirror. So again, you can either use your energy to point your finger at your partner or avoid the problems in your relationship and say, oh, this is just so annoying and so frustrating. I don't even want to deal with this. And then people retreat and don't work at it. But instead, what if you said, what is this mirroring to me about either my needs, my insecurities, my fears, my shadow patterns, or my inner child vulnerabilities? And those might be new terms, the shadow patterns and inner child vulnerabilities. Just as a quick summary, what those mean. Think of the shadow as the part of yourself that you don't want to see and don't want to look at. Hence why it's called a shadow, right? It's like you can't see your shadow. We have these parts of our psychology, of our personality, that we sometimes don't want to admit. For example, I used to have some controlling tendencies. I could keep being like, no, I'm not controlling. If only you ... Instead of going, you know what, let me look at my shadow. Let me look at where I feel these impulses to control. Like, where's that coming from? What does that provide for me? So there's the shadow, and then there's the inner child vulnerabilities, which are really just as we grew up, as we were experiencing our household and our upbringing and watching our parents' marriage. How did that create either like security for our inner child and love and safety, or insecurity? Did we have our needs met? Did we have our parents talk to us about our feelings? And when we don't have awareness of our inner child and those vulnerabilities, they'll often come out in our words, saying things like, it's just never good enough for you. That's your inner child speaking when you're saying things like that. And that's what I notice a lot of times in these shows. There was even a moment in the show where they both kept using those words over and over again of like, I just don't know that I'm good enough for you. And then the other person would say to their family member, like, I just don't know if they're, the right one for me, if they're good enough for me. And it's like, that's the inner child, this whole thing about being good enough for each other, when really, what if they're just communicating their needs? What if they're just communicating what they want within a partnership, and it's not about you not being good enough? They're just communicating that to you and being expressed about that. Anything you want to add, Aaron, to what these mirrors can be within the partnership?
Well, I just wanted to, how I see it, I designate them on time, really. So if you're not as familiar with inner child, I think those are more attachment and bonding related to your primary caregiver. So let's call that from when you're born to like 8. And then shadows I really see as adult things. So from, let's call it 18 on, the things that happen to you unexpectedly out there in the world, trying to fend for yourself. Also your early adulthood relationships, girlfriends from high school or college, those early on relationships, the emerging adulthood, things that happen to you. I see those more or less as the shadows. So that's just how I differentiate them. I don't know if that's necessarily scientific based or not, but it's just more powerful to see tensions and conflict that come up first from the lens of what is this mirroring to me? What trait limitations, what attachment inner child wounds, what situations have I not addressed from earlier relationships and things that happened to me as an emerging adult that I haven't really addressed or worked through? Like, what's that showing me here? And I think that's just a better focus to then come to the table next with your partner to say, hey, what are the relationship dynamics? What are the marriage development things that we need to look at now together? Because at least you come to that conversation by saying, hey, here's what I realize about myself. I mean, it's just a much more inviting conversation. It starts with vulnerability. It starts with honesty. It starts with, again, you willing to take some of the responsibility yourself. What's the other alternative? You're coming to the table saying, hey, this is your fault. So it's just a better approach to these conversations. I think you always have to look at the individual first, and then you look at, hey, with that, what do we see we can do better together?
So second to that, again, we're looking at things within our relationship as a mirror. Now, again, we're not saying it's all on you, because I could all day long say, you know what, I'm going to look at where feelings of insecurity come from my childhood or my lower self-esteem, for example. But then if you are acting in a way that continues to give me cues of us not being secure in the partnership, I can only do so much work on myself. So this is where the relationship growth comes in. And your goal being that our actions, our attitudes, and our words create safety and love versus insecurity and separation in the relationship. Because I can't just keep saying like, oh, well, that your feelings are on you. You just keep working on yourself. It's like, okay, no, we're also giving each other, again, verbal and nonverbal cues that are either going to be creating security and love or insecurity and separation. And we just got off a session a few minutes ago with a couple, and what ended up being revealed through some different prompts that we gave them was that they both had been feeling unsafe emotionally to share how they were feeling in certain areas of life. And in particular, like he really said that. He said, I feel as though when I share how I feel about the situation, you then have feelings about how I'm feeling, and it now becomes about you, right? And then I didn't get a chance to have my experience really acknowledged and addressed because it became now about your feelings. And it was really great that he used that word about creating safety, because that's where you can feel disconnected. Is that, sure, you might operate well, you might get the to-dos done and say, oh, hey, this needs to be done, and oh, hey, I'm headed here. But what makes you romantic partners and intimate partners is that you get to be more open with each other than anyone else. That you get to bring your fears, your feelings, even into the last couple of days. Myself, there's been some things that have come up with family members that were a plot twist, not expected. And I've had moments where I was feeling, because how do I even label the feelings? A mixture of fear, frustration, anxious about it. And had I gone to Aaron and shared that, and then he now either took that personally or tried to fix it with logic, it's like I wouldn't have felt like this space to just share and be acknowledged. And that's so often what we want in these conversations with our partner, even if it has to do with us and our relationship, is to not have it taken personally, not have the conversation hijacked. And really just, can I just be acknowledged? That's what we want so often. Can you just acknowledge? You don't have to agree with my experience, but that's not even what emotions are about. The sooner you accept that emotions don't really make sense, that you really just, not that they don't make sense, they're not logical. That's what I mean. They make sense.
It makes sense if you can understand the perception the person is coming from.
Where they're coming from, where in their past that's guiding that, or just what environmental experiences are happening. But instead of trying to make logic out of their emotions. So anyway, I digress, but the point is that as a couple, you are recognizing if we're constantly influencing each other and giving each other these cues, is how we're handling conflict, communication, big decisions in our lives, our day-to-day interactions in the kitchen. Are we creating security and love or insecurity and separation? And truly contemplate that for a little while. And that's really where our tools come in. That's why we have our 30-day couples challenges, is so that you can create this really great positive feedback loop for each other, where you're both giving each other positive cues and you're catching the negative cues. And why we have our repair guide, so that, because truly, how you handle things after an argument, that's either going to reinforce I'm not safe here, or I'm not loved, or they don't care about my feelings, or they don't take responsibility, or it's going to reinforce, you know what, we can work through anything. We're going to work through this together. So all that to say, if you are hearing throughout this episode things to work on as an individual and together, that's where our resources come in. Make sure you're not just listening to these episodes and getting motivated for 5 minutes. Make sure you're implementing them. And so we've got our 30-day couples challenge. We've got 2 levels, our level 1 and level 2. They just started. And depending on when you're hearing this episode, you may have a couple hours left or maybe 1 day to get signed up for those couples challenges before we close registration. We also have our repair guides. We have we have several really key resources, including, by the way, a few seats left for our in-person couples workshop. Come spend the day with us in person, you guys. October 6th in Arizona. The majority of couples are traveling in for it, so make it a weekend getaway. Last time, one couple even flew in that morning at like 6 a.m., flew home that night to get back to their family. So they weren't even away from their kids one night. But if you can make it a little getaway for one night, that's great. But anyway, come be with us in person if you can. Experience these exercises that we take couples through. Or if you just can't make it because maybe you're international or for whatever reason, make sure you're using our online resources, because implementation is really where it's at. So we'll put several links in the show notes. If you want to see everything that we've got our links at meetthefreemans.com/links. Everything is on there, from our workshop to our guides to our challenges, because we just want nothing more than for you to thrive and to feel united as you experience all seasons together. So the main point of this episode is that you two are going to have the individual things to be working on and becoming the best version of yourself. Doesn't mean you'll ever reach perfection. Sorry, doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to be perfect. We're always human. And as a couple, you focus on creating security and satisfaction together. And that's through tools and skills. Let's learn how to argue constructively. Let's learn how to repair. Let's learn how to handle seasons that are busier, but still making sure we're filling each other's love accounts. So we are here for you. We're cheering you on. And if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure that you give us a rating. Hopefully you feel worthy of hitting the 5 stars. That really helps. And if you're new here, make sure you also hit the subscribe button so that you can hear past and future episodes. But we are rooting for you. Make sure you utilize our resources, and we will talk to you on the next episode.